and welcome to HT's weekly talk show, The Interview. Discussing serious stuff with Dr. Shashi Tharoor is inviting trouble. And this is not because one would lose the argument, but because he would use difficult words which would be impossible to decode. So, the way out, a fun interview with some serious stuff thrown in, not necessarily in that order. This week, we have with us Congress MP Dr. Shashi Tharoor to speak to us. Welcome to the show, Dr. Tharoor, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Very pleased to be with you, Kumkum.
Did you finally have a peaceful night after 7.5 years once the court discharged you in the Sunanda Pushkar case? And I ask this purely emotionally.
Well, I've chosen not to talk about all this too much, but it's certainly the beginning of a process of healing. It really has been, a wound has been inflicted by fate, and then there are people scurrying around trying to scratch at your wound. It becomes a very, very painful exercise. I had to discover inner resources to steel myself over the years, and I focused a lot and concentrated on my other work, which meant that I was perhaps more productive than I might otherwise have been. So I should be grateful to those who thought they could torment me into oblivion. But it wasn't an easy time. Now, it wasn't some magical transformation. It's taking time to sink in. I'm also conscious that the authorities could still appeal if they want to continue this needless harassment. But for the moment, certainly there is a modest sense of relief, and also a sense that that we can now focus on the woman we've lost, who frankly was never really allowed a peaceful afterlife once this tragedy happened.
Yes, I understand that. There must be mixed feelings, and it would not be happiness having been discharged in a case where you've lost a loved one.
Precisely. There's this horrendous sense of shock, which was then compounded by the incomprehensible sort of vulturism on display thereafter, and the most far-fetched constructions being placed on shreds of information that had nothing to do whatsoever with what one might call evidence. As the judge has very painstakingly pointed out in her judgment, there's really nothing there that would have warranted everything that happened. I think in many ways it's been a case of response to a certain kind of public and media pressure. And I think some of the editorials that I read after the judge's verdict came out, which made the point that it's high time that the media itself woke up to realizing that they are not courts of law, that they are not the institutions whose responsibility it is to hysterically scream against individuals. You break news, you don't break other people, but that's what many media have tried to do, going gleefully and maliciously and voyeuristically after people for a tragedy in their personal life is not something that is tasteful at all. Forget me, we've seen this again in the Sri Devi case for a while. So in fact, you find that the kind of culture of bad is far more infectious than the culture of sober, good, responsible journalism.
Torture, relief, and a nightmare. These were the words you used. I'm sorry to take you down memory lane and the painful moments, but our viewers would like to know, what did it do to you? How did it change you as a person? And what were the lessons learned?
Well, you plunge through grief, you plunge through pain, you plunge through a sense of disbelief at the things that are being said about you, because you don't recognize yourself in the portraits that are being painted. You see friends walk away, or you are aware, and soon enough you're made aware that the moment you leave a room, there are people saying things behind your back, and all of these things. So either you can just flee from the world, as it were, and go and hide yourself in a dark corner, or you can just say, I know who I am, I have a clear conscience, I know what I've done and not done, I know what I'm capable of doing, and I will continue offering the best of myself, which is what I came to India to do. I didn't get into politics and public life in order to enter controversies. I'd had a rather controversy-free life for nearly 3 decades in the United Nations.
Were there moments when you wanted to flee and lock yourself up in a room and maybe cry silently in the dark of the night?
Oh, I think the crying silently in the dark of the night must have happened anyway, because some of the stuff going on was awful. And when my then 80-year-old mother burst into tears upon hearing what neighbors were saying in the building about what they'd seen on television or read in a certain newspaper, obviously that's shattering. I had been perhaps spoiled by having led a life where my parents had reason to be proud of me throughout my life. I never thought that anything that I was accused of doing would ever reduce them to that kind of state. So I went through an enormous amount of grief. And, I'm human, Kumkum. I mean, I think all of
Yeah.
us, any one of us facing this kind of thing would have suffered that too. Yeah, but I'm not a quitter. I've never been somebody who has run away from problems, and I've had to deal with all sorts of professional, personal, political, and other problems in my life. So I decided to stand there and face the problem in the only way I knew and the best way I could, which turned out to be the right thing to do, I think.
I'll leave it at this, and do forgive me for scraping the wounds. But let me switch to ICHR. And quite expectedly, you criticized the poster. From Azadi spelling to omission of Jawaharlal Nehru, you said the poster was petty and ahistorical. Would you explain both?
Oh, it's supposed to be the first poster released by the Indian Council of Historical Research as part of their Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav celebrations to mark the 75th anniversary of India's independence. I mean, no small landmark, right? So you have this hideous aesthetics, a cluttered, badly designed poster with two logos, one of the Mahotsav, another one marking 50 years of ICHR, a discolored map of India with some really weird images right in the middle and odd colors in the north and the south. And then two spellings of the word Azadi within 1 inch. I mean, that's really bizarre. You decide what spelling you want and use it. But you have Azadi with an A in the logo and Azadi with two A's in the headline, as if the designer wasn't sure. The whole thing was really absurd. And then you have got this circle, like some sort of seance table of 8 portraits of architects of India's independence. Again, why 8? Only the ICHR alone knows. But they were presumably meant to be the principal architects of India's independence. That's why you put them in the first poster. So Mahatma Gandhi on the top, and then the circle went clockwise past Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Dr. Ambedkar. So far, no quarrel. Everybody would have them both. V.D. Savarkar, well, some of us would raise our eyebrows at that. Bhagat Singh, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, again, others would say, a man of some stature, former Congress president, but also former president of the Hindu Mahasabha, but all right, founder of Banaras Hindu University, let's say that's okay. Then Sardar Patel, then Dr. Rajendra Prasad, India's first home minister, India's first president, and that's it.
And no Nehru.
No Nehru, no prime minister, the first prime minister of independent India, the preeminent voice of India's freedom, the man whose oration, the Tryst with Destiny speech, marks that moment of independence for hundreds of millions of people around the world and certainly around the country. How on earth can you omit him from such a poster? And it was very clear that it was a petty slight meant to be inflicted on the memory of a man the Hindutva movement loves to hate. So you have advocates of violence, you have Hindutva opinion in the shape of Savarkar and to some degree Malviya. So every sector is there, but you don't have Nehru, the first prime minister. You don't have the principal nationalist voice amongst the Muslim community, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Surely, if you're going to have people like Malviya, Bhagat Singh, Veer Savarkar, and so on, who had relatively, shall we say, more limited contributions. In the case of Bhagat Singh, limited by time. In the case of Savarkar, limited by participation. In the case of Malviya, limited also by history and the level of the role he played. When you have people like that, surely these two individuals have to be there. Then, of course, when the backlash began, and I'm proud to say I think I started the backlash, as soon as I saw the poster, I denounced it. And the public quickly rallied around me. I think within a few hours, we had over 6,500 likes to my tweet and 1,700 retweets. CHR said it was inadvertent. How can this be inadvertent? This is like having a movie poster without the hero.
So 3 things. One, on the spelling of Azadi, misspelled twice differently.
No,
And
they can spell it whichever way they want, but they should have one consistent spelling. It just shows the quality of the poster and the minds of those who made it, that they can't even have one spelling when the same word appears twice. Spell it with one A or spell it with 2 A's, but have one spelling throughout.
Unlike you, English is not BJP's strong point. Second,
but Azadi is not English, dear Kumkum. It's a Hindi word, it's an Urdu word.
Written in English? Written in the English script?
So they can pick one spelling.
They did that with Nehru's grandson also. They dropped Rajiv Gandhi's name from the Khel Ratna Award.
I mean, there, I would take a slightly different stand in that Rajiv Gandhi would be amongst the first, I'm sure, to say that if you want to honor Dhyan Chand, by all means do so. Many of us would say you don't need to insult one man to honor another. But in any case, it's not as if they took off Rajiv Gandhi's name and called it the Savarkar Khel Ratna Award. Then we would have all been much more furious. But we all honor Dhyan Chand. And all of us in the Congress party said if you want to honor Dhyan Chand, it's not necessary to insult somebody else's memory, but we are not against naming the Khel Ratna Award for Major Dhyan Chand, so go ahead. There's a very different issue here because when we're referring to the moment of independence, we're talking political history, we're talking about the nationalist movement, we're talking about that moment of independence, we're talking about a whole host of achievements that are indelibly associated with Jawaharlal Nehru.
Let me take you back a few years. Why did you ask Indians at a function to sing the national anthem like the Americans do, with their left hand on the chest?
So what happened was, this was the month after the tragedy of 26/11. It was, in fact, not even a full month after. It was a couple of weeks. I made a speech in Kochi on some issues. And then at the end of the function, they were calling up the singers from the audience to come to the stage to sing the national anthem. And I said, right now is a time when, after what has happened, we all feel the national anthem deeply in our hearts. So I personally intend to stand with my hand on my heart, as the Americans do, when hearing the national anthem, because there's a time when I feel it in my heart. And those of you who wish to join me are welcome to do so. Now, it so happened there were 2,000 people in the audience, and they all stood up and put their hands on their hearts. And this deeply offended some individuals who decided that it was an insult to the flag, where I don't see any insult there. And indeed, eventually the judge said that it clearly is a gesture of respect and not of insult. So why the case? But to my astonishment, the case was admitted by a sessions court, which then proceeded to permit postponement after postponement.
But there was no intention to change the way the national anthem is sung here.
Well, look, if you look at the singing of the national anthem at all sorts of occasions, from cricket matches to kabaddi tournaments, and you see the camera spanning across people in the audience, including some very well-known celebrities, I don't want to embarrass any of them, many of them have the habit of putting their hands on their hearts. So it's not that it's anything wrong in so doing, in my view. But there is apparently a convention in our country that the only way you can have the national anthem is by standing stiffly to attention. And I was, I must admit, unaware of that when I said this. I thought people normally stand at attention, but any other gesture of respect should also be acceptable. I was apparently ill-advised. I was not wrong in the end because the judge said it's a gesture of respect and is not actionable. But the fact is that for 4 years I had to go through the trouble and expense, including showing up frequently at court in person. For what purpose was never very clear. I think we should be a little less uptight and say, as long as you're showing respect, whether you're doing pranam or going on your knees or putting your hand on your heart or standing to attention, respect is all that is required of you when the national anthem is sung. You shouldn't be lounging in a deck chair with your feet on a table. That would be disrespect. But this is not disrespect, and some sort of, shall we say, mature attitude to these things is past due in our country.
Dr. Tharoor, to say that you use difficult words would be an understatement. But let me give you 2 examples. After your book on Mr. Modi was released, you described it with a 29-letter word that I will, of course, not even attempt to pronounce. And you used another word for his beard. Will you tell me about both?
Well, look, first of all, let me stress, I didn't consciously seek this reputation. It comes out of a particular viral tweet that I issued some time ago when a particularly offensive and egregious television showman attacked me on the matter that we discussed already in the show. And I was so outraged by the lies that he had made up to speak. I have, in fact, subsequently sued him for those lies. The fact is that I have actually reacted with outrage at seeing and hearing all these lies. And I said that it's a farrago of misrepresentations, half-truths, and outright falsehoods broadcast by an unprincipled showman masquerading as a journalist. That was the substance of my tweet. Now, for some reason, of all the long words, it was a relatively short one that caught the imagination in our country. The word farrago, which I had been using since debates since Stephen's
No,
College.
this was the 29-letter word for
No,
Modi
seriously,
in Modi's
I'm
book.
coming to the background.
Okay.
The Oxford English Dictionary then tweeted in puzzlement that there'd been 1 million searches for the word farrago from India, whereas in an entire 10 years they didn't have 1 million people searching for that word. So it became a bit of a joke that Shashi Tharoor uses words that we have to look up on the internet and so on and so forth. People started making a thing about it, and of course there were cartoons, there were memes, there were jokes, all sorts of things, and I took it in that spirit and passed away. Then I decided, why don't we try and use this, play along with the joke? So when my book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister by Mr. Modi, was coming out, and my publisher said, will you tweet it that the book is coming out available this week or whatever, I thought, there must be so many authors tweeting my book is available. Let me use a word that will draw attention to this book. It was a pure sort of, if you like, marketing gimmick. And so I said, this book is more than just a 500-page exercise in floxy-nosy nihilipilification. Now, floxy-nosy nihilipilification is a made-up word from the 19th century, which means the art or practice of estimating something or someone as worthless. So if I say somebody is a bevkoof, that's an act of floxy-nosy nihilipilification. If I say this prime minister is absolutely no good, see no redeeming feature, that's floxy-nosy nihilipilification. As I'm saying, I haven't spent 500 pages saying that. I've actually gone in some depth of analysis and tried to understand this gentleman and his appeal and what he stood for and his career. So read it. That was the message. When a certain chief minister of Bihar, who'd run for election alongside us and then dumped us to join Mr. Modi, when that happened, I just tweeted a word saying snollygoster. Definition, a shrewd, unprincipled politician. First used 1845 in the US, latest used today. I didn't need to name him. I didn't need to name his state. I didn't need to name anything that had happened. The meaning was clear just by using that word. So it became a tool, Kumkum, of getting another kind of message across. Mr. Modi, he had a pogonotrophy, which actually is a respectable word, which means the cultivation of facial hair. So, I've seen these people in our country with these elaborate mustaches, handlebars curling up almost to their eyebrows. That's an act of pogonotrophy. And many of us have been mystified how Mr. Modi, who looked reasonably smart and well-groomed with his well-trimmed beard, has suddenly become this rather weird figure with his completely sort of unruly, sort of old sadhu kind of facial hair. And people are commenting about his pogonotrophy, which is not at all surprising.
A reader had asked you, will he get a free dictionary with the Modi book?
I don't think he'll need one nowadays. The internet is a free dictionary. Just type in the words you don't understand. But you know something, Kumka. I've written 22 books. I've made thousands of speeches. I've won 3 elections. I didn't do that by being incomprehensible. I speak in the ways that I consider shall we say, most effective to the audience I'm addressing. And I hope that I use words with precision and wherever possible with lucidity. But I'm not sitting around trying to be difficult to understand, because if I'm difficult to understand, why should anyone vote for me or support me or buy my books or read me?
But why do you use such tough words? Do you enjoy being a walking encyclopedia?
First of all, they're not all of them as tough as people have made them out to be. I think what has happened in some ways is a good thing. We've had the democratization of the public space. Let's say if we were still living in the pre-internet era, if you were living in that small English-speaking urban community that read, say, The Statesman of the 1960s, every word that I have used, barring maybe one or two, but almost probably not even barring those, would have been found in the pages of those newspapers, would not have raised any eyebrows. Because, in other words, the community that you were addressing was much more self-selected and narrow. Today, thanks to the opening up and democratization of our space, when I say something on Twitter, I'm reaching a whole range of people. I'm reaching people who in the 60s would have read The Statesman. I'm reaching people who today are reading The Economist rather than reading an Indian magazine. I'm also reaching people who have barely mastered enough English to be on Twitter, who
who are actually Hindi medium or Bengali medium or Malayalam medium or whatever, but who are there to participate in the public conversation. So it's not um, as if the vocabulary I use is deliberately exotic. I think many people will tell you, including obviously those who publish my books and articles, that I do write with some clarity and precision. But when you're in a general space like social media, Twitter, whatever, then that kind of more focused audience, that target is not there. It's a general mass thing. And so you get some of this pushback. When I'm making
And
my speeches in Malayalam or giving interviews in Hindi, I'm probably accused of being far too simple in my choice of words, which may reflect the fact that much of my literacy was acquired in English and much of my literary reading has been done in English. And therefore, that is the language in which my vocabulary is most developed.
another person asked, and I wonder what Mr. Tharoor's Siri is like. Does she ask Mr. Tharoor the meanings of the words rather than it being the other way around? Did you ever, and do you ever use Apple's Siri? And have you ever reached out for a dictionary?
To be honest, I've never used Apple Siri or Amazon's equivalent, whatever that is, in the little device, Alexa. I just haven't. And it's partially because I just haven't had the time to sit down, master the technology, and then use it. It's not that I have any ideological objections to it. I remember when Siri came out a few years ago, one of my sons, my twins live in America, one of them was very taken with this technology and kept trying to show me. You know, he was barking instructions to Siri on his watch, on his Apple iWatch, and showing me how it was dialing numbers on his phone and all sorts of things. But I knew it would take me a little bit of time to master all of that. And I didn't have the time, and I didn't feel the need.
Do you ever reach out for a dictionary?
Almost never, but once in a while, I may be tempted when I see a word and I wonder whether somebody has misused it, because I wouldn't have used it in that way. In order to give that person the benefit of the doubt, I will look it up, often on the internet, just to see whether the usage that I have seen there is also acceptable. I acquired my vocabulary without having to look up dictionaries very much, because my principle was, if you came across the word 3 times in 3 different texts, novels, nonfiction, articles, whatever, and you could see the context in which they appeared, you would normally be able to understand the meaning and the precise usage and nuance as well. Now, if after 3 times you still don't understand what the person's saying, then there's either something wrong with the way the word is being used, or you really need to look it up. Then you go to a dictionary.
Is it true that you were once offered a role of a foreign minister in a film and you took your friend's advice who said, if you want to be one, don't play one?
That's a true story. It was the movie Ek Tha Tiger. The original script apparently had a scene with the foreign minister talking to the hero and the heroine after a speech he delivers at a conference in Istanbul. And the way they had it, they wanted me to be the foreign minister, and they wanted to play that scene or that extracts from that scene multiple times during the film. So Kabir Khan, the director, reached out, and I was flattered. So I was very tempted. But then because, I had just resigned from government in adverse circumstance a couple of years earlier, and was, still hoping that justice would be done and I would come back, I was perhaps excessively cautious. And out of abundant caution, I asked a couple of friends, and one of them came up with this memorable line: if you want to be foreign minister, don't play foreign minister. And I thought that made perfect sense. Needless to say, when I turned the part down, the film then became a huge hit at that point and everything else.
Do you regret not doing the role?
No, I'm just smiling now. It's a moment that comes in life. It passes and you move on. Why should it matter anymore? And frankly, the truth is that I didn't need or seek visibility. It was just a fun thing to do. People have a bucket list of things they want to get done. I never had this on my bucket list, but there were members of my family who in my student days, in school and college, wanted me to be an actor. I actually won the Best Actor Award at my school in Mumbai 3 years in a row, the only 3 years I competed. And one of them was against Rishi Kapoor, who was ahead of me in a different class. So it was inter-class competitions. And then I acted in college as well. To this day, Meera Nair, when she meets me, calls me Antony, because she played Cleopatra to my Antony in a Shakespeare play at St. Stephen's. So there were all these memories, and I had fun doing all of that at that time. But one has moved on. I think now reality is so much more important.
Even though you're a Modi critic, way back in 2014, you praised him. which was one of the reasons why the Congress party dropped you as a spokesperson. Last year, you said you were touched by his thoughtfulness when he wished you on your birthday. Please take me through this love-hate relationship that you share with Mr. Narendra Modi.
I said very clearly that we owe an obligation to the voters of India to show respect for the mandate they've given the Prime Minister by not criticizing him initially, give him a chance. And I said, if we take him at his word, we're actually in a very good place, because these first speeches were all about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, inclusion, being Prime Minister of all Indians, Constitution will be his holy book, rather than pursuing Hindutva, all of these messages. And so we could have said, it's your own words that give you the yardstick against which we will judge you. And I said, if we have been fair to Mr. Modi during his honeymoon period with the electorate, then our criticism in future, when he deserves it, will be that much more credible. I still stand by that view. He congratulated me, for example, on my Oxford speech. I'm not going to be churlish and say, well, you and I don't agree on other matters, so don't. I accepted the congratulations with grace and gratitude. And similarly, when it comes to other things that Mr. Modi does, I praised him for having taken the initiative to get Yoga Day adopted by the UN. And I've also praised the extraordinary energy he brought to running around the world and introducing himself to various countries. I believe in being fair-minded. But again, my strategy is not that of a wannabe BJP guy. My strategy is as a congressman. I know that for us to come back to power, we cannot only appeal to the true believing congressman. That's 19-20% of the electorate. I know there's a good 10 to 15% of people out there who used to vote for Congress and went to the BJP in 14 and 19, but who are not Hindutva fanatics, who genuinely voted for Mr. Modi because they thought he might be better than what we were offering. We need to win them back. You don't win them back by being, it seems to me, completely and totally critical of Mr. Modi all the time. Because if you're saying that Mr. Modi is so unbelievably obnoxious, then you're telling the voter who voted for him, boy, were you an idiot. So rather than, I would show the voter the respect and say, okay, you voted for Mr. Modi because you thought he'd bring you development, you thought he'd be inclusive, you thought he'd build toilets, whatever it may be that made you vote for Mr. Modi. Well, but look at the larger picture, look at the larger reality. Is your life really better under Mr. Modi? If it's not, listen to what we have to offer and vote for us.
You also spoke of Mr. Modi's efforts to reinvent himself from a hate figure into an avatar of modernity and progress. Has Mr. Modi been able to shed off that hate figure image?
Well, I would say that he has failed rather spectacularly, because what we've seen, unfortunately, is particularly since 2019, very much a reversion to the Mr. Modi of the hardcore Hindutva messaging. And we've seen it manifested in very specific actions. So I have a feeling that, if anything, the development message of the 2014 election, the message that I am the successful CEO of Gujarat Inc. and I will do the same for India, that message is in total eclipse. Understandably too, because the economy is in free fall, GDP growth has cratered, unemployment is at the highest levels ever recorded, people are in misery. We've never had so many micro and small enterprises shutting down for good. It started after demonetization. Every single decision that bears on development has been an unmitigated disaster. And now we're seeing the government also trying to sell off whatever they can because they couldn't build it. They couldn't prepare anything for the nation. They're getting rid of what they've got to have cash in their hands. Now, this is not going to be something they can run on. So they've decided to run in the 2019 elections on 56-inch chest, muscular nationalism, Balakot and Pulwama, and henceforth on Hindutva. So we have seen, except for the COVID crisis and all the attendant colossal mismanagement they demonstrated, which is another issue altogether, their core message, their core preoccupation has indeed been Hindutva. So I would not say that they've lived it down. If anything, I think that the government has actually doubled down on that image. That's the image on which they're going to be identified, on which I believe they will fall in the eyes of the Indian voting public next time around.
You know, your politics never gelled with the Congresses, and the local leaders in Kerala used terms like paratrooper, elite outsider, and someone who's only interested in cocktail parties. How would you explain that? And finally, what would you say to Kapil Sibbal's remarks that Congress is moving ahead with its eyes wide shut?
Look, I'm not going to comment on a colleague's remarks because I think the colleague is perfectly capable of speaking for himself. But on this, I think you've got a very partial view. Don't forget that not only have I won 3 elections in Kerala, but with the first and last with rather significant majorities, larger than had been recorded previously by a Congress candidate in that constituency. It's not exactly an easy constituency to hold, which would, I think, not be something that could be accomplished by a so-called elite outsider attending cocktail parties. By the way, I don't think in these 12 years in politics, I can recall a single cocktail party in Thiruvananthapuram that I've attended. So this was the kind of demonization that was attempted against me when I first came in because of the diplomatic reception culture of the United Nations and how it wasn't going to fit into Indian politics. But I would have thought that I had proven otherwise over more than a dozen years. But on the larger question of what I stand for and whether it's acceptable, let me say very clearly, I didn't acquire my convictions from the Congress Party. I have been writing and publishing books since 1981 and articles since my college days, in fact, my high school days. So my views are a matter of public record. I have, I hope, established an independent reputation for views that are completely in consonance with the core values of the Congress Party. I hope that what I have brought to the Congress Party is what I believe in, my track record as a writer, as a thinker, and my track record of work in the international circuit in diplomacy and administration. And that's what I can offer to the Congress tomorrow and today. And therefore, other things to my mind are marginalia. In politics, there's always some little carping here and there, some criticism here and there, some backstabbing here and there, some groupism, some dissension. I think I learned the hard way that the most important thing in Indian politics is a thick skin. That if you start reacting to and being sensitive to every slight, real or imagined, you will never be able to focus on your work. And what I've been through over the last few years taught me the importance of giving importance to the things that really matter in life and in work. And that's what I'll continue to do.
My parting shot, why are you always in trouble? From one controversy to another. Do you enjoy trouble?
Not at all. As I told you, I've spent an entire working life of 29 years without ever having encountered a single controversy. I was the man who was supposed to always know the right thing to say, the right stand to take. I formulated the UN's positions around the world. I was the one wheeled out by the UN from a relatively early stage in my career on all the tough shows from BBC's Hard Talk to Fox News that used to hate the UN because I was the guy who never landed the UN in any controversy. So to come to India and suddenly find myself described in this way, I found initially astonishing and then somewhat amusing. I think it shows that we have still a culture where originality of thought and expression, firmness of conviction, and the courage to say what you believe is still not somehow accepted without it stirring up some sort of controversy in people's minds. I'm prepared to take that risk. I'm not going to stop being who I am. And I hope that being who I am is what gives me whatever following, whatever respect, whatever support I do have in politics and outside.
Dr. Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And thank you for taking all the questions despite your busy schedule.
Thank you, Kumkum. All the best. Take care.